this is Marika and welcome back to another session of Community Health Nursing with me. In our previous session, we have discussed about disease agent and we also discussed in detail about biological agents. In this session today, we are going to discuss another very interesting topic, which is host. Now, before we move on to today's topic, let us quickly recall what agent is, as the topic that we are going to discuss today is related to our previous topic. Now, a disease agent can be described as a substance, it can be described as a force, it can be described as a factor that is responsible for causing the disease. The factor, the substance, or the force can be living, non-living, tangible, intangible, and are the major cause of the illness. There can be one single causative agent, there can be presence of two different complex agents when combined together causes the disease, or it can be presence of multiple factors or multiple agents which together cause a disease in the human being. Agents are majorly classified into four different categories, which includes the biological agent, physical agent, mechanical agent, and nutrient agent. Now, under biological agent, we have discussed in detail about the bacteria and the virus, where we have seen that biological agents are the living agents, as the name suggests, and bacteria and viruses are discussed in detail because these two agents are the major causative organisms in most of the diseases. We have discussed in detail what is a bacteria and what is a virus, and what are the categories of bacteria and virus that are found to cause certain disease in human beings. Now, in this session today, we are going to discuss a very short topic, as I said, which is host. It is a very interesting topic. So let us begin with today's session. Now, to begin with, let us simply try to understand what is a host, okay? So, a host is a larger organism that harbors smaller organism. The term host can be used for any larger organism that allows a smaller organism to live on himself. A larger organism that harbors the smaller organism is called as host in simple terms. Now, let us try to understand what is a host in a disease. A host in a disease refers to an animal or a plant that acts as a biological refuge in which another, often parasitic organism dwells. So this definition of host says that a host is either a plant or an animal that acts as a biological refuge. Okay, it acts as a biological shelter for another organism, which is usually parasitic, and that organism starts to live in that particular host. So a host can be considered as a plant or an animal in which parasitic organism starts dwelling, starts living and reproducing inside the host body. The host acts as a biological refuge. What does refuge means? Refuge is shelter or protection from danger. All right. So the host will act as a shelter for the organism. These microorganisms are usually parasitic in nature. They start to live in the host, they start to multiply in the host and produce diseases. The host usually provides shelter or nourishment to the other organism. The organism which stays in the host, the organism which takes the shelter in the host will start providing either the shelter or the nourishment that is required for that particular organism to survive. In the disease point of view, human host is considered as the swell, right? The human body, the human host is considered as the swell, and the disease is considered as the seed. So when there is a swell and the seed has to enter inside the swell and there will be development of a plant, right? So in a disease scenario, the human body is considered, the human host is considered as the swell and the disease is considered as a seed. When this seed is planted in the swell, it is obvious that it will lead to development of a plant. When this seed is planted in the soil, it is obvious that it will lead to development of the soil. It will lead to development of the plant, which means it will lead to the development of the disease. So a human host can be diseased after the entrance of the pathogenic microorganism, after the entrance of the parasitic organisms inside the body. For example, if I am a host, if I am a susceptible host, the microorganism enters inside my body and there is a high chance that I as a host may suffer from certain kind of illness or a disease that is produced by the microorganism that have entered my body or that has been sheltered in my body. So the entrance of microorganism may cause the disease in the human host also. The response of human host to the invasion of microorganism, to the entrance of microorganism, depends on various factors. So as I said, As I said, the agents may cause mild allergic symptoms to severe medical condition and even death of the person. So how does a human host respond to the entrance of the microorganism, to the invasion of the microorganism, depends on various factors. Let us see what are those factors one by one. The first factor that we have is demographic factors. The first factor that we have is the demographic factor. What is demographic factor? The demographic factor or the variables are the personal statistics of a person, which may include information such as age, sex, ethnicity, race of the person. How a person will respond to a certain disease is affected by the demographic factor. For example, the second wave of COVID-19 have affected the majority part of the world, but it was said that Indians will not be affected much by the second wave of COVID-19. That is because of the demographic variables, because of the race, ethnicity, and the kind of region that we stay in. So demographic factor also plays a major role in the development of the disease, as well as how an individual, how a human host will respond to the invasion of microorganism. The second factor that we have is biological factor. Now, biological factor obviously differs from one individual to another. The genetic factor, cellular constituent of the blood, immunological factor, physiological factor, all these factors are responsible for a proper functioning of an individual, and it differs from one individual to another individual. So the response of the human host to the microorganism, to the invasion of the agent, also depends on biological factor. The third factor is the socio-economic factor. Socio-economic factor may include factors such as education, the economic condition of the person, stress, and marital status, etc. The fourth factor here is lifestyle of an individual. The fourth factor that we have is the lifestyle of an individual. Obviously, the lifestyle of an individual also plays a major role in how the individual will respond to a disease, right? The lifestyle may include the kind of exercise the individual may do, the kind of diet the individual consumes, the living habits of an individual, smoking, and personal behavior of an individual. So, lifestyle of an individual also plays a major role in how the individual will respond to the invasion of microorganism. When there's entrance of any kind of foreign material inside our body, it is obvious that as a host, as a human body, our body will show a certain kind of defense mechanism, right? So human host will try to defend against the invasion of microorganism, and this may result in clinical cases, subclinical cases, and latent cases. So what is a clinical case? A clinical case is a case that is present, that is producing symptoms, and is brought to the notice of medical facilities. And the latent cases are the cases that are present but are not active cases. So when there is entrance of microorganism, when there is invasion of pathogenic microorganisms inside our body, as a host, our body will try to defend against it. When our body tries to defend against it, there can be three different types of symptoms that can be seen. There can be three different types of cases, which includes the clinical, subclinical, and latent cases. Subclinical cases are the cases that have symptoms which are very mild or are not readily observable, and the latent cases are the cases that are present but are not active. So now what is to be done when there is invasion of microorganism, when there is invasion of pathogenic organism, and when it starts to produce illness in the human host? Proper diagnosis and treatment may lead to the elimination of the pathogenic microorganism found in the host, right? So when we do a proper thorough diagnostic examinations and the treatment is given rightly to the patient, then the disease-causing organism may be eliminated from the body of the patient. But in some cases, the disease-causing organism, the pathogenic microorganisms, are not eliminated from the body of the person. Now, this may occur due to inadequate treatment, due to improper treatment of the disease, due to improper diagnosis of the disease, due to the wrong treatment that is given to the patient, or it may also occur because of the immune response of the person. I hope you've understood what is the host. The host is a plant, it can be an animal, or it can be a human being who is infected by the pathogen. So the host is the person who is infected by the pathogen. Now, what is the role of host in the disease transmission? What does the host do? The host acts as a source of information in the transmission of the disease. As an individual, if I am the host, if I have the microorganisms inside my body, then obviously I'll act as a source source of information for the other people around me, right? Especially for communicable diseases. The host will be the source of information in case of communicable diseases. Moving on, let us see the types of host. Now, as I said, the host is a person, animal, plant that harbors another microorganism, especially parasitic, which causes the disease in the host. Now, there are different types of host. There are majorly two different types of host, which includes definitive host and intermediate host. Let us see what is a definitive host first. A definitive host is a person or the animal who is infected with the adult or sexual form of pathogen. A definitive host is the person or the animal who is infected, right? The host is the person or the animal who is infected, but the definitive host is the person or the animal who is infected with the sexual form of pathogen or an adult form of pathogen. The second type that we have is intermediate host. Unlike the definite host, in intermediate host, the individual, the person or the animal is infected by a larva or asexual form of pathogen. Again, I'll repeat to make it very clear, a host is a person who harbors microorganism and can act as a source of information. It can be a plant, it can be an animal, it can be a human being. The host is a person who gives shelter to the pathogenic microorganisms, right? Now, there are two different types of hosts. The first type of host is a definitive host, and the second type of host is the intermediate host. The definitive host is the definitive host is the person or the animal who is infected by the sexual form of pathogen or the adult form of pathogen, whereas the intermediate host is a person who is infected, but the person is affected by the larval stage or the asexual form of pathogen. That is the difference between definitive and intermediate host. So, what is a carrier, or who is a carrier? In very simple terms, carrier is a host without obvious illness. A host without obvious illness is termed as carrier. A person or an animal that develops the illness is obviously a host, right? We know that a person or animal that harbors the microorganism and develops the illness is the host, right? This is an obvious example of host. But in some cases, there can be hosts who do not show any obvious symptoms of the disease, but acts as a major source of the disease, and they can be termed as carriers of the disease. So the carrier is a person or an animal who's infected by the host but do not show any kind of obvious symptoms, and they act as a source of infection for other people around. They act as a source of information and spreads the infection to other people. In some cases, the carrier may have certain symptoms which may be very, very mild, or there will be no presence of any symptoms in the carrier. So these kind of hosts who harbors the microorganism but themselves do not show any kind of symptoms but acts as a source of information is called as carriers, and they are also called as asymptomatic carriers. I hope you've understood what is a host, what are the two different types of host, and what is a carrier. Now, carrier is also a host. Don't be confused. The carrier is also a host. In simple terms, a host is a person who harbors the microorganism, right? So, the carrier is also the host because the carrier is also having the microorganism. The carrier also has microorganism present in their body. Microorganism present in their body, but they themselves will not display any kind of symptoms, and because they do not display any kind of symptoms, they are called as asymptomatic hosts. But the carriers act as a source of information. That means they have the potential, they have the ability to spread the infection to other people around. They have the ability to infect other people. That is it for today's session. In this session, we have discussed a very interesting and a very short topic, that is host, in which we've seen the host is a person who harbors the microorganism. The host is usually a larger organism which gives shelter to a smaller organism. Host is usually the main source of infection in the chain of infection. The host transmits the infection to other person, is the source of infection, and there are two different types of host, which is a definitive host and intermediate host. Under the host, we also have a different type of host which is called as carrier. I hope the class was helpful, and I'll see you all in the next session where we will discuss another interesting topic, which is immunity. Thank you and have a great day ahead.